Good morning. Today is Wednesday, May 31st, 2023. This week's Torah portion, the Parsha of Naso, contains a mitzvah, a narrative that is very curious, the mitzvah of Nazir. Nazir is a person who takes on themselves special rules of holiness and abstinence. They will refrain from any type of alcoholic beverage that comes from grapes. They will not cut their hair. They don't come into contact with a dead body, for example, attending a funeral or going to a cemetery for any purpose. And normally, if a person would take this on, they would do so for a period of 30 days. There were exceptions. There were certain individuals that did it for a longer period of time, notably Shimshon, Samson, who became a Nazir at birth and lived his entire life from birth to death as a Nazir, never cut his hair famously. That is the subject of the Haftorah for this Shabbos, relating to this subject of Nazir. Now, so the Torah describes becoming a Nazir and what it means and how it ends, but the Torah does not anywhere clarify why a person might undertake this. And even more interestingly, the Torah is not clear about whether it is something that is commendable or something that is deleterious. In fact, it appears that the Torah gives us an ambivalent picture of whether this is a good thing, because on the one hand, the Torah says, Kol Yemei Nizro, for all of the days that this person is a Nazir, Kadosh Hu Lashem, the person is holy to God. That certainly sounds like it's a nice thing. It's a good thing to want to be. But then, when the period ends, a person has to bring a karban chatas, a sin offering. Apparently, they have committed some kind of sin, which kind of indicates that it's not such a great thing to do. Now, the disagreement over how to look at this subject of Nazir goes all the way back to the beginnings of our intellectual history, back to the Mishnah, the Talmud, through the medieval period. It remains an ongoing debate. So, for example, in the Talmud, according to Rabbi Elazar, and then later according to Rambam, Maimonides, a Nazir is praiseworthy. This is a good thing to do. If it's a good thing to do, so why does the Nazir have to bring a karban chatas, a sin offering, indicating that he's done something wrong? So they say the reason for the karban chatas is because he's returning to ordinary life. His sin lays in ceasing to be a Nazir. Once you take on being a Nazir for 30 days and you're holier to God, why wouldn't you want to stay there? So if you end the period at 30 days, you have to bring a karban chatas because you are leaving this special level of holiness. Okay, that's one approach. There's another approach, also in the Talmud. The Gemara quotes Rabbi Eliezer Hakfar and Shmuel. They say that no, the Nazir did something wrong by denying themselves the legitimate pleasures that God has placed in this world. And God created the world and said about the world in Bereshis, and it is good, v'hine tov ma'od, it is exceedingly good. And now you come along and you say, no, I don't want that. I don't want that. I don't want to benefit. I don't want to enjoy that. And the Gemara says, according to this opinion, that a person who denies themselves legitimate pleasures in life has done something wrong. There's an amazing story I've quoted many times to you, the great Rabbi Shamshon Raphael Hirsch, who was a rabbi in Germany in the late 1800s. At the end of his life, he announced to his family that he was going to tour Switzerland on foot. So his family and his students were alarmed because he was an elderly man, and walking through Switzerland on foot, it's a challenge. And they said to him, but why is this so important to you? And here's what Rav Hirsch said to them. He said, when I come before the Almighty after 120 years, I will have to answer for many things, many shortcomings, many mistakes I've made in life. But what will I say to God when God asks me, Shamshon, did you see my Alps? Did you see my beautiful Alps? What will I say to God then? Rabbi Jonathan Sacks explains that clearly this dispute, which continues to rage through the centuries, is not merely a textual dispute, it is substance. It's about this subject of asceticism. Is it a good thing to live a life of self-denial? And the truth is that almost every religion has this phenomenon of people in pursuit of a spiritual purity who withdraw from the pleasures of the world, withdraw from the temptations of the world. They may be people who live in caves, people who go on retreats, monasteries. The Qumran sect, just to take one group among Jews, they left Jewish society around the time of the Second Temple, end of the Second Temple period, and they went to live in caves, apart, separate, pure, untouched by the rest of the world. This trend finds itself in other eras of Jewish history as well. In the medieval period, we also have Jews that engaged in different kinds of self-denial, of asceticism. There was a group of Jews known as the Hasidei Ashkenaz. Now, the Hasidim of Ashkenaz, this is not what we mean by Hasidim today. This is a different group, several centuries ago. And they lived in Northern Europe, and they practiced denial and separation and asceticism. The same is true for certain groups of Jews in Islamic lands. And it is possible that some of the influence of these groups of Jews in different places may have come from the non-Jewish environment in which they were living, because the Hasidei Ashkenaz flourished during the time in Europe of the Crusades, where also there at that time there were Christians who followed a lifestyle of self-mortification and asceticism. And the groups of Jews in Islamic lands coincided with the time of Sufism, which was a mystical movement within Islam that also preached separation from wider society and self-abnegation. And it could very well be that the negative comments that normative Judaism makes about Nazir and these other groups may stem from the fact, or partially from the fact, that maybe these groups were influenced by non-Jewish groups who were practicing the same thing. Okay, that's a possibility. What is very difficult to understand is what is the opinion of the Rambam, Maimonides? Because in Maimonides' work, the same work called Mishnah Torah, that's his main work of Jewish law, Maimonides, the Rambam, contradicts himself. In one place, he says being a Nazir is good, and another place, he says being a Nazir is bad, in the same work. In one place, in Mishnah Torah, the Rambam says, quoting the negative opinion from the time of the Gemara, a person who says that I will separate myself from the world and go to the other extreme and not eat meat or drink wine or live in a decent house or wear decent clothing, a person who wants to be like a Nazir, to follow an ascetic lifestyle, the Rambam says this too is bad, and it is forbidden to choose this way. Yet, just a number of pages later, in his laws of Nazirut, of being a Nazir, the Rambam quotes the other opinion. The Rambam says, whoever makes a vow to become a Nazir, he does well and is praiseworthy. And the Torah considers him equivalent to a Navi, to a prophet. So how does the Rambam, in one work, in one place, say that it's bad, and in another place say that it's good? So here's how Rabbi Jonathan Sacks explains it, and I think it's a brilliant, brilliant analysis. Because what the Rambam is saying is, there is not one single path to the moral life, to the good life that God wants for us. There's more than one path. And the Rambam identifies at least two paths. One of the paths is the path of the saint. And the other path is the path of the sage. The saint, Rambam explains, is a person of extremes, a person who is kind to the extreme, a person who acts in excess, far beyond what the law requires, a person who wants to avoid arrogance so much that they humiliate themselves, they humble themselves to an extent that they ignore their own needs. They go to extremes. The sage is a different kind of person. The sage is one who follows what the Rambam describes as the golden mean, the shvil hazahav, the golden mean, the golden path, the middle way, the path of moderation and balance. The sage avoids extremes of cowardice and recklessness to acquire the virtue of courage. Courage is a balance between recklessness and cowardice. A sage avoids being a miser and avoids being wasteful, acquires the middle path of generosity. Generosity, not too stingy, not too wasteful, but generous, in the middle, moderation. A sage understands that both extremes are different, are dangerous. Both extremes can lead to harm. And therefore, what the sage does is the sage weighs the two extremes and avoids the extremes and seeks to find the balance in the middle. Now, Rabbi Sacks explains, these are not just two different types of people. And by the way, I think that we could probably recognize certain people who fit into one category or the other, but it's more than that. It's really a question about how do we create a decent society? Because a saint may give all his money away to the poor. But what about his own family who doesn't have enough to eat? They may suffer because of the saint's extreme generosity. A saint may pursue peace to the extreme, but what about when you're in danger and you have to defend yourself? Peace can also be taken to too far an extreme and leave us vulnerable. A saint may forgive every sin committed against them, every insult, every crime committed against them. But what about the rule of law? What about justice? You cannot build a society out of saints alone. A saint is really not interested in society. A saint is mostly interested in their own personal perfection. The Rambam explains to us that the Nazir has chosen, for at least a period of time, to adopt the life of a saint, of self-denial, of extremism. He's adopted a path for a certain amount of time, for some specific reason, of personal perfection. And that's noble, and it's commendable, and it's exemplary. The Rambam says this is praiseworthy. But this is not the way of the sage. And while a person, for a certain amount of time, may be able to elevate their own personal perfection through this asceticism, you can't build a society with saints. You need sages if you want a just society. Because a sage is one who realizes that there are other people at stake. You can't pursue only your own perfection to the exclusion of everybody else. What about your family? What about your community? What about the world? If you want to create a community, you've got to defend it. You have to have order. You have to have justice. You have to have compassion, but you also have to take care of your own. A sage understands that you can't leave behind all the other commitments in life just to pursue your own holiness. In a certain way, being a saint is a form of self-indulgence. I want to be perfect. The effect that it has on others, not my concern. But we are ultimately called by God to live in the world and with the world, not in seclusion from it. And therefore, what the Rambam is telling us is maybe from the point of view of the Nazir, from the person, the personal perspective, this Nazir is a saint, but from the societal perspective, this person has to bring a carbon chatas. They have to bring a sin offering because they have shown a disregard for the wider needs of society. And it's fascinating that Rambam himself, Maimonides, lived this lesson in his own life. We know from his writings that Rambam throughout his life longed to be able to devote himself only to studying Torah and writing works of Torah. And his early years were spent that way, exclusively devoted to writing works, commentary to the Mishnah, works on Jewish law, and we know that he planned many others. But then there came a time when he had a responsibility to support his family, and he became a physician. And then he had responsibilities to take care of his patients. We have a letter, a famous letter he wrote to someone who wanted to come visit him. And he wrote back to this person. He said, listen, you're welcome to come, but you just have to know in advance, I'm not going to have much time to spend to talk to you because during the week, I'm busy from sunrise to sunset every minute taking care of my patients. On Shabbos, I'm busy every minute, sunrise to sunset, teaching Torah to my community. And I just don't have such a thing as free time. The Rambam had to carve out his understanding of how he could balance his own spirituality, his own scholarship with his responsibility to the larger world. The Rambam wanted to be a saint. but he knew that he could not be if he was to honor his responsibilities to his people. There are many people who face this in a multitude of ways, whether to pursue excellence, religious excellence in one area with stringencies, but without any awareness of the difficulties it places on others. I see so many examples of this. And I see the strife that it causes. I see someone many times, and they want to pray at great length. And so they'll attend services and they'll pray. And even when the congregation is finished, they're still praying. But their family is at home on Shabbos waiting to start the meal. And the children are hungry. And the wife is lonely. So yes, it's great to spend so much time praying. But what about your family? There's so many examples of this in every area of religious life. Rav Moshe Feinstein, certainly one of the greatest scholars, saints, but he was also a sage. Rav Moshe Feinstein had the practice that he would be at home, he would be sitting at his table, studying Torah, and his wife would say to him, the Rebbitzin would say to him, dinner is ready. And he would jump up in the middle of the sentence, close the book. There was not an instant delay. There was never, let me finish this page, let me finish this letter. And he could be writing a letter that was giving advice to millions of people. He could be figuring out an answer that related to life and death without exaggeration. But he never allowed that to affect the respect he had for his wife. The moment she said, it's time for dinner, immediately he got up, closed the book, and he came. Rav Moshe Feinstein was a saint, but he was also a sage. And balancing the two is what we need to aim for. My friends, I wish you a great day, and I look forward to seeing you soon in person.